All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. We are thrilled to have this group of speakers. This panel is going to be called "The Cost of Fiat Currency." So again, you've heard this word a lot. We haven't, we've defined it a little bit. We haven't really kind of unpacked maybe why we're all not so crazy about it. So that's what I want to do. So before we start talking about that, I want just our panelists, you guys, to introduce yourselves to people who might not know who you are.
Well, I'm sitting next to you, so I'll start. Hey, I'm Mark Moss. I make a lot of content regarding Bitcoin, the financial system, et cetera. I've been a lifelong entrepreneur, investor. I'm a partner in the new Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, trying to build the world that we want, putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak, to try to build the world that we want. And so, I understand. I came to understood the importance of Bitcoin back in 2015. I've always had kind of this very pro-freedom stance, and when I realized that Bitcoin is really a tool that we finally could win with, it was something that I just wanted to kind of tell the whole world about, and I haven't shut up since. So the last 7-8 years, I've spent my life learning, discussing, talking, teaching, investing, and building around the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Hi everyone, my name is Luke Broyles. First of all, I'm very grateful to Jordan and thank God for Bitcoin for inviting me down here and having me speak. It's an honor to be next to these two gentlemen here. I started posting on Twitter my general thoughts on technology, the world, and the pace of change, and the rate of pace of change increasing back in January. And it's been pretty much a whirlwind of meeting people and just been a huge meaning to me in order to meet everyone that's been an influence in my life, and now I get to share the stage with a couple of them. So thank you guys very much. So thanks.
My name is Mike Peterson, one of the founders of the Bitcoin Beach project in El Salvador. Also, we run a missionary care organization in El Salvador, which was what brought me there originally. And now we're focused on helping other Bitcoin circular economies develop throughout the world. We have projects from South Africa to Peru, Guatemala, and just kind of seeing this change in freedom that adopting Bitcoin brings to people that have been excluded from the traditional banking system, and seeing for us that is just an important movement of justice, and justice is something we believe God cares very deeply about, and so that is our focus. That's how we were basically brought into Bitcoin, is seeing on the practical level that if we really want to meet the needs of the poor, that we need to do better with money. Expanding on that, we now have a Live from Bitcoin Beach podcast where we kind of go into these issues and focus on how faith impacts our interaction with Bitcoin, and then also focus on the number of people from around the world that are moving to El Salvador, seeing it as a place where they can come as really refugees. We're seeing a lot of people come out of Canada and other places in the first world that want to escape repressive regimes and live in a place that embraces freedom.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys. Okay, I'm going to ask Mark. Mark, I know there's people sitting out here in this audience, I can think of several of them, who maybe this idea of fiat currency, they get that it's maybe not great, but what would be some of the 2 or 3 reasons you would unpack why fiat currency is bad? Like what are the effects of it? What are some of the effects of it?
So I think first thing I would just say is that it's important to understand there's lots of nuance in this, and I also want to just kind of stress the point that everything in life is about trade-offs. And so there's pros and cons to everything. There's costs and benefits. And so in fiat currency, there's lots of negatives that we can talk about. There also are some benefits and positives as well. To answer the question, we'll start on the negative side, though, of course. I think ultimately it goes against the laws of the universe, the laws that were laid out in the Bible, which is the law of sowing and reaping. We cannot reap until we have sown, right? There is no free lunch. And so that's what fiat currency does. It allows us to bend the laws of the universe, go against the laws of nature, and it allows us to pull forward or pull future gain today and spend today what we have not earned or what we have not sown. And so I think it distorts the entire balance of the world from there. I think also on top of that, the fiat currency that we kind of have today, which I guess has always been this way, where the governments control the amount of money, and because of that, they lie and they manipulate and they deceive us as to what the valuation of that money is. They lie about it. They don't tell us how much there is. They purposely mislead us, especially in today's day and age where it's gotten way overcomplicated. The financial plumbing is so complex. There's less than half a dozen people that really even understand how it works today with the reverse repo windows and the Eurodollar systems, et cetera. And it's so complex that we're being lied to about it. They tell us they're tightening the balance sheet, but really they're just moving it to a different side of the balance sheet, for example. They deceive us again. And so when you have a system like that, it's inherently evil, it just breeds that, right? Charlie Munger says, show me the incentives, I show you the outcome. And so when you have this system that incentivizes people to deceive and lie, then that's what happens. That's the outcome that we have. And so unfortunately, it leads us to a system where the best way to get rich today is by theft and deceit. As a matter of fact, it was Vladimir Lenin who said, he told John Maynard Keynes, the best way to destroy capitalism is through inflation. And so it's the fiat money system that allows that inflation to happen by increasing the money supply. So the best way to destroy capitalism is through inflation. Through a series of inflation, you can arbitrarily steal. And then he goes on to say towards the end, he says, and we can steal, and eventually all ability to see what's going on is lost, and the best way to get rich is through gambling and theft. And that's exactly where we're at. So that's kind of the benefit, the damages. And then there's lots of downstream effects we could talk about, the damage to societies and so forth we can get into, but to frame it up, that's enough.
All right, Luke, give us 2 reasons why we should care about fiat currency. This issue, again, many of us have gone our whole lives without thinking about this thing. Why should we start now?
If I were to pick 2 reasons, I think the first reason comes down to the ultimate problem, and I believe the ultimate problem is sin, and the ultimate problem is what occurred in the Garden of Eden, and that we are corrupt, and we chose ourselves, we chose our own freedom instead of being slave. Oh, is Mike? Okay. And I think that ultimate problem obviously applies to every facet of life, but in regards to fiat money in your question, I think that means that ultimately you can't have humans, which are sinful, be in control of the money, because everything we touch, everything we manage, everything we influence essentially becomes corrupted to that degree. And so I think the only way at which we can have a form of money that does not have that evil component baked into the incentive structure of that money is to somehow detach that human heart or that human nature from it. That doesn't make Bitcoin, in this case, divine in that sense. It's just a tool in the same way that this microphone is just a tool, or anything else is just a tool. It can't cause that evil. It just is what it is. I think that's the first problem with fiat currency, that it survives as a function of human management. And because all humans are corrupt, and because all humans inevitably externalize that corruption, it's inevitable that the fiat becomes corrupted. And we've seen that in history. There are hundreds, or thousands, depending how far back you want to go in time, fiat currencies that are created, destroyed, created, destroyed, created, destroyed. And to me, that's, to go even further in your question, that's the beauty of the potential of Bitcoin, is that thus far in human history, we've had cycle after cycle after cycle at different times where we create a new fiat currency, we inject our own corruption into it, and then it resets essentially in a given period of time. Obviously, the larger the empire, the larger the nation state, the longer that takes. But anyway, that's the beauty, that perhaps for the first time we might be able to disconnect those things. So I think that's one problem I would say about fiat currencies, is that they are inherently dependent on human management. And I think the second reason is very similar, in that not only are humans not like God in that we are sinful, but in the same way we are not omniscient. We don't know everything. I think when it comes to Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen and Christine Lagarde and everyone else that's in charge of these major central banks, the 3 or 4 major central banks of the world, why is everyone always yelling at them? Everyone's always yelling at them because you're not taking this data into account, or you're looking backwards, or you're not viewing my perspective. And that makes perfect sense, because they aren't, and they can't. They can't know everything. Jerome Powell, when he changes the price of money or changes interest rates, I all the time on Twitter, people like to hate on him or curse him out, and to his credit, I think he's doing a job that no human can. No human can predict every factor of the economy. No human can predict the weather. No human can predict the downstream implications of everything that their actions can do. And so I think that's the second problem with fiat currency. Not only, number one, that by by having humans in charge of it, not only are we injecting a corruption into it, but we are also baking in efficiency, because no singular human, no centrally planned decision can be better than millions, hundreds of millions, or trillions of independent decisions.
Yep. Okay, so the two answers that you gave are fantastic and true. And so, like, these are true things. Like, they're stealing from us. Like, these things are against the denial of sowing and reaping. This is fantastic. I was like, soon I'm over here amening interior, in my interior, as Mark says those words. So the question I want to ask you, Mike, is, again, you would agree with all these answers, but how, like, based on your life and your work in El Salvador, you would have probably, I would guess, a more human answer. I don't say that in a mocking way, but, like, how would you answer that question? What is the cost of fiat currency?
I think it's hard for a lot of Americans or people from the developed world to understand the cost of fiat currencies because we control them and they were developed a way to really give us a competitive advantage in the world. And so working in El Salvador, even though they use the US dollar there, the fact that they didn't control the pipelines and they could be cut off at any time, you saw how this really distorts things. And so I think the cost of it comes from really restricting billions of people from participating in the world economy on a level playing field, to kind of locking them into this role as servants or slaves to the rest of the world because of their lack of access to the financial system, them not being able to build wealth. And because of the way fiat is structured, it incentivizes short-term thinking and spending now versus saving later. Because if you live in most of the world, you don't have any vehicle that you can save in that will not go down in value over time. So what are you going to do? As soon as you get it, you're going to spend that. And that locks you into this cycle of living day to day and not really being able to develop any type of generational wealth or any way that you can actually participate in the fair system. So I see the problem of fiat is the fact that it allows there to be gatekeepers. It allows there to, even things that come under the guise of doing good, like KYC and AML policies, that the practical impact is it locks billions of people out of the system and makes them servants to those of us who do have access to it. So that's on the practical level what I see.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? It's kind of the reverse. So Mark is talking about fiat currency denies sowing and reaping. And the effect of fiat currency on places like El Salvador is it denies the good sowing and reaping. So these people are working really hard. They're working really hard. They're denying themselves. They're serving their neighbors, but they don't have anything to show for it at the end of the day. And so you get frustrated. You get frustrated and you feel like, what's the point of doing this? And so God, like, designed sowing and reaping to be this thing that gives you this feedback loop where you recognize obedience, right? And so can you describe, the people you're working with in El Salvador? Like, you were working with young boys. Why young boys? Like, why was that?
We specifically focused on young boys just because of the gang problem in El Salvador. For the past decade, they had the highest murder rate in the world. Most of that driven by gangs, and it was endemic in every part of the population. The gangs controlled really more territory than the government did, and so for most young men, that was the most successful route for them. They felt like nothing else they could do. They could work in a dead-end job where they would barely make ends meet, or they could join the gang and have some sense of power, and so that became the thing that a lot of them aspired to. And we saw when we started challenging some of these young people to participate in our programs and started paying them in Bitcoin, it flipped this switch in their minds where for the first time they thought about saving, because they thought, do I want to spend these sats now, or do I want to hold them in the future where I think they'll buy more? And it's the exact opposite of fiat. With fiat, you feel like, I better spend it now because the prices might go up tomorrow. So we saw people that were making $300 to $400 a month, which was the average wage in El Salvador, for the first time in their life actually saving. And in the past, they'd always said, well, we can't save, we don't make enough. But we saw when you changed the money, they found a way to save because they started thinking longer term.
That makes a lot of sense. Mark, like as you see, okay, so you're, again, this seems like some people, the temptation would be to think, hey, well, we're not El Salvador. You know, so like what would you say to somebody who's like, well, hey, it's not that bad here. So is this really something that's really a pressing issue for, you know, for us?
I mean, it's not that bad here. I mean, it's not. And so, unfortunately, as humans, we typically don't move until the pain gets high enough. And so in places like El Salvador, places like Lebanon, Argentina, Venezuela, et cetera, where the money's seeing double, triple-digit inflation, places like North Korea, we're not even allowed to have money, the pain is high enough. So in those places, in Lebanon, when you can't get your money out of the bank, your money's seeing triple-digit inflation, you don't have to tell them why they should get out of Fiat. They already know. We have to tell people in the U.S. why Fiat's bad, because the pain isn't high enough. But I think it's a spectrum, right? And so, you know, kind of thinking what Mike was saying is that story, you know, I think about like this kind of analogy where like if I was in some, you know, third world country, somewhere in the Congo in Africa, for example, living under some bloodthirsty warlord, and anytime he wants, he can come steal from me. So then I have no incentive to build value. I have no incentive to save because I know at any time he's just going to come take whatever I have. At the same time, the warlord isn't incentivized to provide any value either because whatever he wants, he can just come steal. So we're in this situation, we're in a system where neither me or the person or the warlord are providing any value to the world, not value to each other or just value into the world, no progress, et cetera, because of this theft system that's built. But if you flip that, if you flip the balance of power to where now the person is able to now save because the warlord can't come steal from them. So now I have the ability to store my money in a system like Bitcoin that can't be taken. Well, now all of a sudden I'm thinking long term, as Mike is talking about. Now it changes my long-term perspective and I'm able to start saving. And so I'm creating value so I can push that value into the future. And then the warlord goes, well, shoot, if I can't steal from them, the only way I'm going to get money is by providing them value. So I guess I should give them roads and bridges and water, et cetera, and then I'll get a piece of that money. And so we went from a system where neither party is thinking long-term, neither party is providing any value to the world, to each other or the world, to now both parties are now thinking long-term and providing value to the world. Now, that's an extreme example, but on a spectrum, is that much different than the United States? They just take from us arbitrarily whenever they want, either through taxation, confiscation, or inflation. They take from us whenever they want. Now, they don't take 100%, but they take 50. So we're on that spectrum. Obviously, other countries are worse. So at some point, the pain will be high enough. And for those of us that are waking up sooner, the pain is already there, and we're already making those adjustments. And I think eventually the rest of people will feel it.
Luke, so I know Luke is into like real estate. Okay, what do you see as, so the fiat currency changes the incentives involved in decision making. So how do you see, what are some of the ways that you see, you know, fiat money and the nature of it, the way that it works? What kind of behavior have you seen, like with maybe in the real estate world? What kind of things does that incentivize?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think people like Mark Moss, Mark over here, or others that are much more into real estate than me could probably answer this and have many more stories than I would. But in my limited experience, it's amazing and it's appalling to me. All these regulations and all this red tape and all these programs out there aim to help people and have more affordable housing or whatever. When you just do the minimal amount of research and the deep dive into that, you realize incredibly quickly that, wait a minute, these aren't actually designed to help the tenants. These are actually designed to help the people. This is designed to create more scarcity in the housing market. I think Jeff Booth probably puts it better than anyone else right now in the entire Bitcoin space, but he talks about this battle between central banking and deflation, or free market, innovation, capitalism, which is essentially what Mark just described about freely giving value to the world. And I think when it comes to real estate specifically, as you mentioned, I think that could be said with all assets, that when you have an infinite amount of money, you need to have a scarce amount of assets. And it's very strange right now because we have more abundance, we have more wealth. Mark and I were talking behind stage about how when he was growing up versus now my generation, we're growing up, we have so much more prosperity, we have so many more things, we have so much more time, we have so many more opportunities, and yet it feels like we all have this itch, we all have this urge that things are becoming more scarce. And I believe that real estate is an example, all this regulation and this incentive to keep house prices up because we can't afford to let them go down. Because then we'll have 2008 on steroids again, we'll have a credit crisis, we'll have a banking crisis. And I think we're seeing that. I think it's happening now. 3 of the 4 largest banking failures in American history, adjusted for inflation, have happened this year. I mean, it's ridiculous. And I think into the future, we'll just see that ridiculousness continue, where house prices just keep going up and the cost of living just keeps going up, when in reality, it should be going down, but we can't afford to let it go down. So yeah, it's very sad.
Okay, so that might not be intuitive for people. Why should the prices of things like that go down? Why should the prices of food or like normal things go down? Why is that a normal thing to expect?
Well, kind of like Mark was saying about providing value to the world, if, say, person A wants to provide value to the world and person B wants to provide value to the world, the nature, again, of decentralized money and decentralized economy is simply that the person that provides more value for a lower cost is going to be the one that gets a larger market share. And so essentially what capitalism, or perhaps even more broadly a free market is it's a competition to decrease prices as much as possible. And yet that's not what we see in the real world. We're seeing money increase at a faster rate than the rate of us producing new stuff. Or as Elon Musk famously said in the 2020 lockdown, if you don't make stuff, there is no stuff. So yeah, as we make more stuff and we make more money faster than we make more stuff, that's why prices go up. When in reality, if we just had a fixed number of currency units, then there would be more stuff to denominate into that. There would be more stuff to put into that denominator. So yeah.
Okay, Mike. Now this is a question that I get. Okay, again, you're like Bitcoin, great, helping Bitcoin Beach. These people are very poor. How much Bitcoin can these people even have? Like, how helpful is this really? Okay, somebody just asked you that question genuinely. How do you respond to them?
Yeah, just to tie in a little bit to your last question about real estate and what we've seen in El Salvador too, but you really see it in the U.S. when housing becomes a store of value, it really distorts the price people have to pay who actually need the housing. And so rather than housing cost what it should cost just to actually shelter you, you're paying this premium because it is the best store of value for most people in the world. You see people from China putting money into houses in Toronto because that's the best way that they can do it, and it drives the housing cost up there. So you see that everywhere in the world. You've seen that in El Salvador too, where rather than real estate just playing a role to shelter people, it becomes a store of value. And so I think that hurts the poor more than anybody, because the wealthy benefit from the price increases while the poor are actually homeless because of it. So, and I think that ties into the second part where Bitcoin allows people for the first time in their life to access something they can store value in. Yes, Salvadorans could buy real estate in the past, but you had to have a certain amount to even enter that market. So you needed, $5,000, $10,000 to even think about accessing that as a store of value. Where with Bitcoin, you can have 50 cents. You can have a quarter. You can enter in at the incremental. So you can start saving for the first time $1 a week and buying Bitcoin with that. There's no other scarce asset that they can access like that. That is literally the only one. And what's great is there, especially in El Salvador, the way it's set up now, there's no friction or fees, or very low fees or friction that go along with that. So they can, for the first time, start accumulating, which incentivizes them. If you are trying to invest in something and you're going to pay 25% in fees just to get in, I'd rather just spend it on something else. And so you never actually start that process. So the fact that they can start from nothing and be on the same playing field, have the same access as I do, or as the richest person in the world does, they have that same access, it makes a difference.
So it's like the equivalent of stop digging. If you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. So even if it's not, the problem wasn't created overnight, so the solution is not going to be, El Salvador is necessarily, they're not going to be millionaires overnight, but it's just at least having a just monetary system is a step in the right direction, basically.
But and seeing that for them, I mean, I'm always shocked. These people, they're making $300 or $400 a month, and they're like, yeah, I have $1,000 in Bitcoin because I've been saving for the past year, $100, every 2 months, and the price has gone up during over a longer time period. And so they can actually accumulate an amount that then they can turn into a business or buy a home or something like that. So it gets them on that pathway to start thinking about the future, where before it just felt like pointless.
Yep. Again, Mark, you talk about these things all the time. You talk about various levels. What are some things that, again, if we have people out here who are, this is the first time they're hearing about these things, what are some other maybe avenues or approaches to this topic that you think would be helpful to somebody in that situation?
Yeah, it's hard. There's not really a one-size-fits-all, back to kind of we move when the pain is high enough. And so each one of us have a pain that we're trying to solve. That's what we do as humans. And so most likely that pain could be pulled back to where Bitcoin could be a solution for it. So I think there's kind of a different path for each one of us. But I think in regards to, I love what Mike said, and it kind of was back to what I said, show me the incentives, I show you the outcome. It's not just El Salvador people don't save. 60% of Americans don't have $400 for an emergency either. And so part of it is the cost of living is too high, the income is too low. Certainly in El Salvador that's the case, but it's also because there's no incentive to do that. And so there's this game theory that kind of kicks in. All of us work off of games, so they've gamified everything. And so if we can now, and that was a great point that Mike brought up, where now we can buy a fraction. I can buy 25 cents of a piece of property where you're not able to do that before. And once I have 25 cents and then 50 cents and then $5 and then $10, it starts to gamify that. So I think that's a big piece. But as far as like learning more, I think, man, there's so many rabbit holes to go down. I think it really just kind of comes down to what it is that you're interested in, what problems you're trying to solve, how this kind of fits into your life. Obviously, plenty on the monetary side. I'm also thinking about it on more of just like the freedom side. And so as this world is transitioning right now, I think there's one big theme that I have my eyes on, and that is as this world is changing, my thesis is moving from a centralized world, central planned world, to a decentralized world. The central planners, the authoritarians, are grasping for power, and what does that mean? That means censorship. And not just censorship of my speech or my communication, but censorship of my movement and censorship of my ability to spend money as well. And so Bitcoin is really kind of helping to solve all of that. Not just being able to send my money without censorship. If I want to send money to a lady in Afghanistan, for example, there's no way to do that. The Taliban will take that money. But I could send it to her via Bitcoin uncensorship, But also we're able to see now communication starting to work that way. And also we're also starting to see even an amazing benefit that I've seen just recently, one that you'll appreciate, is that with the new ordinals that have just launched, but there's a lot of different viewpoints on that. And maybe it's ridiculous to put it.
Wait, what? Bitcoiners aren't big fans of ordinals? Wow.
I mean, so maybe it's ridiculous to put a JPEG on the Bitcoin blockchain, but there's more than that. And so throughout history, there's been persecution against the Bible. Over the last decade, I mean, how many people have put their lives at risk trying to smuggle physical copies of the Bible into authoritarian countries like China, for example? And they just put the whole King James Bible onto the Bitcoin blockchain. And so now it's censorship resistant. Now we could move the Bible, or any other book for that matter, 3D gun schematics, etc., across directly into any authoritarian regime with the speed of light, and they can instantly have it. And so if the big theme is censorship, Bitcoin is here to fix that, as Bitcoin fixes everything.
So, again, you could define money in a number of different ways. Like, there's people who talk about money as energy or money as power. Like, what? I mean, I think the censorship is, you're saying basically rather than centralizing power, which fiat lends to.
I look at it as a value. So money communicates value. So if I give you $1,000 for an iPhone, I've communicated the value of that iPhone, right? And so it communicates value. But what is value? So you say store of energy. Well, energy is value, right? I've expended energy to dig this hole. I can store that energy in money that I could decide to use at a later date. But ultimately, I think about it as value. And so then what is value? Well, think about in the 80s, what was information? What I got in the morning newspaper or at nightly news. That was like information, but today we look at information differently, where I see a picture, some kid posted a picture on the beach in Thailand, and I know what the weather's like, I know what the waves are like, I know all this other information. And so I think of value the same way. And so money is value. It's a communication of value. But what else is value? Well, the King James Bible, words, schematics, plans, all that's value. And so I think it's going to greatly expand what our definition of that is.
All right, Mike. So again, you have these young men. You're paying them in Bitcoin. Again, this for the skeptic out there, for like the cynic, like it's tempting to be like, okay, this is El Salvador though. Like it's a tiny little country. Like what's El Salvador going to do, against somebody like the IMF or against, how can Bitcoin really do anything in these tiny little countries? It's one thing to work there, but can it really help to work in other places?
Well, I don't know if you saw that they, for the second time, introduced a bill to basically examine how El Salvador was going to, dethrone the U.S. dollar. That's
Can you just, like, for people who have no idea what you're talking about, what was the bill?
So it was actually a bipartisan bill. There's somebody on both sides that have come together to sponsor this, but really the bill is to examine El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin and how that's going to impact the U.S. dollar. And if you read through it, basically they're fearful that it is going to topple the dominance of the U.S. dollar, that this will be the first domino to fall and that others will to follow. So obviously, even people that have, the levers of power in the United States are very concerned about a small country like El Salvador adopting. And that's usually how these things start. They start from small grassroots, movements like Christianity itself and dominate the world, going forward as they're spread. So, yeah, I think that it's definitely in small places these things will start.
So Goliath's like scared of this little David? Is that kind of...
Exactly.
Okay.
I think, just real quick, to add on what Mike had said earlier, billions of people around the world are kicked out of the system because of things like KYC. And so in order to control the system, what the U.S. Treasury really wants to do is they want to be able to see every single transaction. Maybe not always control every transaction, but have the ability to, and that's the visibility. And so through that, they enact measures like KYC. And
what's KYC?
Know your customer, where you can't go do transactions of cash, even in the United States, over $10,000 without getting information about who it is that I'm working with. Banks fill out suspicious activity reports, SARS reports against you. And so KYC requirements, AML, anti-money laundering requirements, but also FinCEN requirements. There's the FATF, travel rules. And so there's a dozen or so of these types of systems. Even the SWIFT system is a system of visibility and control. And ultimately, it's so they can maintain that monopoly that Goliath is afraid of losing. And so they've kicked people out of the system because if you don't qualify to have KYC, so when you get into a lot of these countries, they don't have ID. I just had to flee Syria. I just came from Venezuela up to the U.S. I don't even have an ID. And so then I can't participate in the financial system. And so there's billions of people that have been kicked out of that, and they got kicked out of the party, they're going to go start their own party over here. And so while the U.S. is afraid of being dethroned, their over-aggressive actions are forcing people outside of the system to find another one.
I'm sorry, there we go. We got 2 minutes left. Okay. Again, this is something where, you have people fleeing outside the system, but again, isn't something like KYC, isn't fiat currency good because of something like KYC? Doesn't KYC keep us safe?
The criminals always find a way around. And this is something I'm very passionate about because I've seen, it's like Mark was saying, a lot of people don't have the documentation to participate, but it goes beyond that. For a lot of the banks, they're de-incentivized to bank these people because there's cost to KYC. And so if you don't make very much money, you're not a worthwhile customer to the bank. And so it's easier for them to exclude you from the system. And what I've seen in El Salvador is the US government actually puts much more strict KYC and AML requirements on the rest of the world than they do on their own residents. I have to fill out KYC material to pay my kids' tuition for school, to get a long-term service contract on my car, because the US government intimidates these countries. If you don't do all these things, we'll kick you out of the SWIFT system. And this holds billions of people out of the economic system, and really they persist in poverty because of it.
All right, I'm going to open this up. We have 55 seconds left. Is there anything that any one of the three of you would like to kind of finish up with? Go for it.
Yeah, I think ultimately when, as Mark said about trade-offs, there is no perfect solution as far as I can tell. Even there is no solution without cost. And even loving Jesus, we have to put down our own life. We have to carry the cross. So even when it comes to Christianity, there is no free lunch, and thankfully Jesus paid that debt for us. And I think when it comes to debating which system is better, fractional reserve, fiat, centralized, Bitcoin, decentralized, freedom, KYC, non-KYC, everything, I think ultimately, and for me, what I'm most passionate about is the human cost. What's the human cost? What is this doing to society? And so Mark and I were talking backstage. There's a lot we don't know about a potential Bitcoin standard or the future of Bitcoin, but I just look at the world today and I do my best to extrapolate those incentive structures and feedback loops into the future. And just doing the numbers of how many human lives are currently being suffered by fiat and what could potentially happen in the future because of that is both really concerning for the future of our current system and gives me a lot of hope for this potential new solution, and that it might be a solution that lasts a really long time. So I think ultimately Bitcoin's not just about money, it's not just about freedom, but it's about reducing the amount of preventable death and suffering in the world, especially for the poor and impoverished, which ultimately Jesus called us all to live. So,
Amen. Thank you guys so much.
Let me